All right. Now, apologies, I did have to put it on my phone, but I did a little bit of pre-work just to prep the conversations. So there was a paper written last year actually, which was estimating that the percentage of ownership in Australia particularly in businesses has actually risen up to about 30% of businesses in Australia are actually owned by people of Indigenous backgrounds. But there is still a few issues with how they work with other businesses and work with corporates. There's been huge amounts of work done by the government and by traditional incubators and accelerators around bringing in specialised programs to help businesses from Indigenous backgrounds accelerate and build their businesses. And, there's a series of things that are being made available through government programs which people can take can use to build those businesses. So what I thought I might start off with is we're going to have a quick conversation with Charles first. Charles is going to talk a little bit about what is the state of play, particularly with governments and how Indigenous businesses work and what he sort of sees from a corporate perspective. So I'll hand over to Charles quickly and then we'll sort of go from there.
Thanks. So I run LendLease's Indigenous procurement program across Australia. And as I said yesterday, we spent $68.3 million with Indigenous businesses, and it's not enough. We need to spend more. Qantas, Telstra, Rio, all companies, many companies around Australia are doing it. And it's probably fair to say they're not doing much as much as they could in the tech space. And probably one of the biggest reasons for that is because of a lack of awareness and maybe even some unconscious bias in terms of not kind of even thinking that there are Indigenous tech entrepreneurs out there. We do a lot of civil earthworks. We move dirt, we dig tunnels, we build skyscrapers. Even in LendLease, we probably don't think enough as we should that around the ICT space. And talking to the gentleman here, Corey and Liam and others in the recent couple of days, even I'm finding out that there are more Indigenous tech companies out there, and I'm engaging in our space around the fact that we should be approaching them and we should be considering them. So there's a huge problem still with just general awareness across all of the Indigenous business space, but that's growing, and we do need to focus on different sectors like the tech space. But for us, tech is not new. We've been around hundreds of thousands of years. People talk about the boomerang, and I don't know if tech people in the room use cash these days. It's all on your apps, but if you're lucky enough to have a $50 note in your pocket at the moment, you might be aware, you can have a look at it, and there is an Aboriginal person on the $50 note. His name is David Nyaagu. He was an engineer and an inventor more than, I think, almost 100 years ago. So this space, technology generally is not new to us, and we just have to keep the awareness growing. For LendLease, we support UTS, and we'll soon be having a relationship with QUT around STEM. So in UTS, they have the Gulliver program, and that attracts 60 students a year, Indigenous students from around the country in years 9 to 12. And they do a week-long course in STEM at UTS, and they'll soon be doing it at QUT. So we need to build that pipeline of individuals. After 6 years, there's probably around 400 Indigenous kids that have done that now. They go on, quite a number of them, to programs like Career Trackers, which places Indigenous tertiary students into the corporate sector. So we actually have quite a few of those that have come into our graduate program with tertiary qualifications at the corporate. So what can corporates do? They can support these programs, support a pipeline of talent. They can employ these people as individuals, and they can look a lot more closely. Again, there's this thing out there called the internet and Google. Some of you might be familiar with it. There are Indigenous Australian companies in the tech space, and we just constantly try and get people, even in LendLease, to say, have a think about it. So that's really, I suppose, the kind of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg approach.
Well, I might throw over to Liam. So you heard a lot of things from Charles there, particularly around, how we get people into these programs and how we can sort of raise that awareness of tech skills within the Indigenous community. So what sort of things are you thinking about that?
Yeah, so it's quite interesting because I think it really comes back to this initial exposure piece. And I talk about that initial exposure piece because I kind of look at my own journey. When I was at university, I did a business degree, but I didn't study with the other business students. All my friends were doing engineering and computer science degrees, and I was just like, okay, I'm intrigued here. I'm really keen to learn more. So I used to talk to them quite a fair bit about, what it is that they're learning and what they're doing. And, they showed me bits and pieces. And then once I finished my degree, I went and worked at Microsoft, and started my career there. And then when I was there, so I didn't tell them that I had an Indigenous background, but then conversations started happening, and then they're like, okay, cool. So you're Indigenous. We want to talk to you more about what we can do to understand more about your culture. And I always said to them, well, one thing I'd love to do is be able to walk through the hallways of the office and see more Indigenous people, and have that opportunity for them to actually share our culture and our stories as well, as opposed to us just learning about tech. But that again came back to the fact that there wasn't a huge amount of talent in terms of Indigenous people in the tech space already, or even doing degrees, that are computer science related or tech related essentially. And so then you got to kind of, I guess, peel back the layers and say, okay, well, there's an underrepresentation of Indigenous people in the STEM space in particular because our parents, aunties and uncles didn't typically have jobs in this space in the past. We typically have social justice, education, health, all those types of things where we kind of gravitated towards, whereas now we're starting to see a shift. So I grew up in the city. My mates were of all different backgrounds, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and my exposure to what they were doing influenced my journey. But then you look at other people in my community who may not necessarily have as wide array of people to connect with outside of our community. And so it's kind of like, how do we create this exposure? And this is what we do through Indigitek. So Indigitek is a charity that I found. And basically what we do is we encourage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are already in the STEM space to come together to share ideas, talk about opportunities and talk about challenges, but then to utilise this community as well to encourage other people to move into this space and consider learning pathways and career pathways. And we've started to actually build that at the moment. We're not a recruitment agency, but we've positioned 8 people into tech-based jobs by taking them through, some of them through learning pathways and then getting them into the likes of CBA and a couple of tech companies based in Melbourne as well. So the main thing is exposure, and that's what we need to do, and then really starting to drive this conversation around what we can do as a community to be more engaged in this space, but looking at technology as well, being able to actually solve problems within our community. So how can we actually look at health, education, housing, et cetera, and how technology can be bolted onto some of these things, some of these areas that we typically are engaged in work in, but to make those areas become more efficient for our people and for outcomes.
I might throw it over to Rob now. I'd love to hear a bit about your experience across the ditch, obviously in New Zealand, and whether there's some things that resonate with you that are sort of happening here that you're seeing across in New Zealand as well.
Thanks. Great to be here as well. What a great event. Thanks for the opportunity, and it's a pleasure to support someone like Leo Dinez, who's a bit of an inspiration himself, I'm sure, for anybody who knows him. So thanks, Leo. Look, for me, I've lived in this region for 15 years, so 12 of those were in Australia and the last three in New Zealand. So I've engaged with Indigenous businesses both in Australia and in New Zealand. So I think there's parallels there, definitely, in terms of it's great to hear Liam talk about education, because I mean, if we look at pure statistics around the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia, 3% of the overall population. So circa 770,000 people from that background. I think you just got to look at pure maths and probability of and then access to education and being empowered to be able to position themselves to be in with an opportunity to work in a technology organization or any large corporate. So I think pure kind of probability there that plays a part in terms of population, and then I guess what percentage of that population is between 18 and 24, roughly a third of that population here in Australia. And then what percentage of that population actually makes it to tertiary level education? And I think you touched on that, Liam. So that's super important to understand whether individuals actually have access to education in the first place. And then when they do, what's the attendance statistics around, what percentage on average for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders actually are able to maintain that attendance at school? That gives them the opportunity then to springboard into wherever their aspirations are. So I think there's lots of factors. Some key factors I think in you may not be aware of in New Zealand, the Maori economy is a $50 billion economy in itself. So Maori businesses, that's the current number. Now, if you take a stat like the richest individual in New Zealand has a net worth of 15 billion. It gives you an indication where that economy could actually get to, and if you speak to anybody in that area, certainly it's nowhere near reached its potential. So I think some key differences for me, Te Reo, the language, the Maori language is now taught in secondary school in New Zealand. So that's on the curriculum. So if you think about the exposure that non-Maori students are getting now to the Maori, culture and being able to understand what it means, and that's super important, and it's very inclusive. So I think we're looking at greater inclusion. Certainly from my lens, working on the supply side, it's very much an inclusion and diversity lens as well, and trying to encourage more inclusivity within the supply chain, and trying to make it easier for startups to engage, and we may expand on that slightly later, but it's not easy sometimes engaging with a large corporate, especially in a highly regulated environment, and LendLease would be well certainly versed in that, but in financial services we're heavily regulated. There are minimum standards that we expect suppliers to be able to meet, so I think corporates definitely have to do more to reach out and create visibility and transparency around what those standards are. But likewise, I think just understanding where those services are, and we've seen obviously Supply Nation here, there's no Supply Nation equivalent in New Zealand. Yet we've got large corporates in New Zealand like Air New Zealand, like Westpac, like Spark, which is the telco, primary telco provider in New Zealand. They've got commitments. They don't have reconciliation action plan targets. We don't have targets in New Zealand in terms of kind of minimum spend targets. It's purely driven primarily through the vision, the corporate strategy, engaging the community, helping NZ Inc. be prosper and grow. So it's very much a community lens, and that comes down to money management programs, helping lower socioeconomic areas better manage their money so that they can create their own business opportunities, so that they can engage and get business from other larger organisations. But also New Zealand is primarily a SME-driven market. It's a small to medium-sized supply base. So it's a fantastic opportunity to engage with that variety. But I guess we look at variety through multiple lenses, and there's other people in the audience here who've worked in the same kind of role that I'm in, and but it's women-owned business, it's Indigenous-owned business, it's disability confident enterprises. It's not trying to classify, but I think if you can understand what's available in the marketplace through organisations like Supply Nation, and as a procurement person or a commercial person, understanding where that service can fit into the spend profile of the organisation, then you can create more connectivity with companies like Liam's and Corey's, and being able to actually engage more appropriately.
So we've heard some pretty similar themes around understanding and transparency and those things. So Corey, from your experience of creating a business, in this market. So what sort of challenges are you seeing in this space?
I suppose just before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge our traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people, on which lands we meet today, and I'd like to thank them first and foremost for letting us do business. I'd like to wish everyone safe travels on their way home in this horrible weather as well. I suppose it is the transparency. From my journey alone, I was introduced to the tech world quite late. Realistically, I jumped into the tech world about 6 years ago. I suppose it's the transparency, the understanding the product, understanding the industry a lot more. Jumping into business, for me, was quite a scary transition. I worked with New South Wales Police Force for 6 years, and then I went underground for 6 years. So it was quite a big jump into coal mining. For me, again, it comes down to, jumping into that late. I think the exposure, for me especially, surrounding myself with the right people. I've also been working with the New South Wales Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, where I had that exposure and I had that one-on-one as well. Exposure to the likes of Liam's business as well, and actually seeing the entrepreneurs out there and realising that, okay, what's this product, what's this service, and how can we better interact? The transparency behind that has gotten a lot better, especially working through the Indigenous Chamber of Commerce. We're actually seeing a massive jump into the tech world. As Indigenous people, we've been in the tech game for over 40,000 years. It's just the tech's changed. Look, it's hard to say because where we've come from now, the digital gap is just blown out of proportion. We don't want to miss out on that tech game. I jumped into this, into Goana Solutions, would have been just over 2.5 years ago now, because I seen a need. I seen a niche in the market. My kids know more about tech than I do. I've got a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old girl. My 5-year-old can't even read. So, and it's a matter of just going through and understanding what's the future holding for them. And it's the likes of Liam's businesses that we want to connect with, because we want to be able to push that social through the business. And it's understanding what the large guys are doing to because it's an intergenerational change as well. They're not just supporting that business. It's the intergenerational change as well, from nothing to something. So I think that the journey for me it's only just begun.
Cool. Might throw to Charles.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my mic. I've got to leave soon, sorry. But I just wanted to flag the opportunities, so, you people in the room are tech people, tech startups, as much as the challenges that you have just getting into the pipeline of major corporates and getting your businesses off the ground, so do Indigenous techs. But I suppose in terms of the opportunity, there's opportunities to partner, there's opportunities to have a point of difference, and particularly around the social kind of context, there's an opportunity to contribute. So Wayne Denning, Carbon Media in Brisbane, Queensland, he actually spoke at a Google conference in San Fran recently, and talked about the opportunities around culture and technology. So he partnered with Sesame Street and got Jessica Malboy, and they did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a little when they count on Sesame Street, and they produced that in a digital overlay, and they were around Alice Springs and Uluru area, not on the rock, but around it. And so they had digital technology. They were having Aboriginal kids out on country. It was globally produced and showcased with Sesame Street. Here's an Aboriginal man from Brisbane talking at a Google conference. There are a huge amount of opportunities, both on a business opportunity to partner with, as an employer to employ people, and also as a marketing opportunity. When you come to LendLease and say, we are an Aboriginal company, or we're a 49% Aboriginal company, we can help you with your ICT, we can, contract pieces of work, you can give us pieces of work. There are market opportunities, and I suppose there's a significant amount. We spent $68 million, it's not enough. The combined market around Australia is growing to more than $1 billion per year with Indigenous businesses, departments of defence, transport, the feds, the states, corporate Australia. So you can take the time to look at what the opportunities are with individuals such as Corey and Liam and many others, and how you might want to get involved in this space and employ and actually contribute to the conversation of Australia and our kind of our national identity and history as well.
Cool. What sort of things would you love to see happening in the future? So we've moved slightly at the moment. So what are you looking forward to in the future, Liam?
Well, I think one thing, and this kind of leans on some of these comments around exposure. Firstly, is the normalisation of STEM pathways and opportunities for Indigenous people. Similar to, I guess, if I liken it to the journey that Indigenous people now go through university. When I was at university in the early 2000s, there was probably about 50 or 60 other Indigenous people at the university at the time. If you then look at like the University of Newcastle now, they have over 1,000 Indigenous students, so that's become normalised. So I want to see pathways around STEM and education around STEM becoming normalised within our community. So I think that that's an important thing. I also want to see the way that technology interacts far better with our culture and our community, because technology, yes, does provide a lot of solutions and a lot of efficiencies and productivity, but we need to be able to find a way where we're able to integrate it into our culture and our community, because at the end of the day, you kind of think of Indigenous communities, and this is a simplistic way, but around being urban, regional and remote. And the way that we all interact with technology is vastly different. And the way that we then, like for example, I live off country, so my people are the Gumbaynggirr people on my dad's side, northern New South Wales, and my mum's people are the Waka Waka people up in Queensland. And I travel back home, once in every while, but I'd love to be able to connect more with my culture and my people, but remotely. And so then I also look at and this idea around remotely being able to connect. I'd love to be able to see the normalisation as well of Indigenous people being able to work on country and work remotely and contribute to big corporates or small businesses or whatever it is, or even lend their skills and their knowledge back to the community that they're actually living in as well, because then that inspires others in the community too, and this comes back to exposure. When others see them in community having the success that they're having, they then are like, okay, well, Liam's there doing that. If he can do it, I can do it as well. It becomes normalised in the perception, in the mind of our people, to actually explore these different pathways. So I mean, I can guarantee that the majority of you have the ability to work from home or work remotely. Why can't we do it as Indigenous people in the Indigenous community? I'm sure as well that a lot of service providers that you guys use in terms of like Telstra, etc., have call centres overseas for support for different layers of what they're doing. Why can't that tech support be Indigenous tech support, whether it's tier 1, 2, 3 or 4? Why can't we actually start looking at the way that we're building up our own economy? And this isn't only just an Indigenous challenge as well. How do we actually start to build this as part of the Australian narrative in terms of being able to support regional and remote communities all across the country to be able to actually build up their economies where they are? And I talk about this, I guess, more from a little bit of a selfish perspective, because when I hop on the trains or when I'm driving my car in the streets, it is busy here. And it's because everyone's moving to the cities to find opportunities. Why can't we actually spread the opportunity across the country and make it more inclusive, not just for the cities, but make it inclusive for everyone across the country?
Cool. I'm just going to... Charles does have to go, so I'll thank you very much for presenting, Charles. Cool. I might just... Do you want to have a bit of a comment on that as well, Corey?
Probably the one thing I'd like to see change is positive engagement. I want to see a time where there is no policy around Aboriginal procurement policy, Indigenous procurement policy, Aboriginal participation in construction. I'd like to see a time where that is just generally wiped and people are engaging because we are good businesses. We're not looking for handouts. We put our hand up, we won't work. We're more than capable. And everyone speaks about this being an Aboriginal economic development. It's not. It's an Australian, because it's social economic development as well. It starts with me, and it carries on, and then it carries on. So I really think it's around that positive change, that meaningful engagement, not just, hi, I've ticked the box, there's my KPI, and just being honest. It's not all about, I've shaken a hand, that's my engagement out the way, but what's the outcome of that engagement? What's the result? Did you just buy a computer, or did you just engage, or did you acquire our services because we are a good company? And look, we want to come to a point where it's a flow-on effect. where we can support other businesses, like Liam's, like mine, like whoever's coming through. We don't want people to come work for us. We want entrepreneurs to come to us and be a part of the team. That's what we want, because that's going to create, systematic change.
So, Rob, I guess to you as well, you've heard a bit about what these guys are saying. So where do you think it's going? What sort of things do you think will evolve into?
Yeah, look, I'm lucky. I mean, I haven't always worked in banking. I'm not a banker. I work in a bank, but I've done that for 8 years. But before that, I've worked in manufacturing and tertiary. So but what I do see in large corporates in Australia and New Zealand is that commitment, and it goes beyond their core business. It actually is meaningful. It's real. It's sometimes has to be metric driven to create change. But I agree with Corey in terms of when it's fully embedded, then it should be a natural way of working. Look, for me, I just think it's silly not to. We're very lucky as a species to be able to look beyond a certain timeline and ethically make decisions that are going to benefit not just us now, but the future generation. And I think that's what we have to do, especially when we have the purview or the ability to be economic or technical decision makers. I think we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we're fully, armed with all of the information that we have available to us. But even today, being here today, and I'm sure yesterday, anybody here, irrespective of whether it's Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander owned company, I've seen companies here in the last 2 days that I just didn't know existed. So I think the more that we can connect in those accelerator hubs and shared workplaces and get the message out, and something like B2B Rocks is a great concept to really connect all organizations, whether they're corporate or medium-sized. I think it's just, what's that marketplace? How do we get more visibility of what the art of the possible is? And but make it easier for people to engage. I mean, in a bank, you've got a number of areas that you can engage if you're a startup, let alone an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander owned startup. It's corporate affairs, it's procurement, it's the relationship management side of a bank when it comes to pure banking, or it's actually any tenders that are released, obviously formally at a wide level, an open level or a selective level, or it's just getting in there through social procurement organizations or social, like social traders, or getting in through, really anywhere where there's a representative of a large corporate presenting. I mean, if you do your desktop research, if you're a smaller organization, if you get online with your target market and actually see where those pathways to engage are, I think you'd be surprised how much of it's actually in the public domain. So you actually have to do a bit of research, and likewise banks have to do the same, because we're partly dependent on things like, organizations like Supply Nation, but the amount of cold kind of calls and engagement that I've had over the years is phenomenal. So I think I would encourage more of that. Create the awareness, create the connectivity, formalize it if you can. Don't just follow one path. I think you have to look at multiple kind of entry points within large corporates, because there are multiple entry points. It's certainly not just limited to one entry point, because often at a procurement lens, we're not the economic decision maker. We're facilitating the outcome, and it's somebody else in the business who needs the service that we're there to partner with. So I think that's what I mean by kind of multiple entry points, if that makes sense.
That's good. So we're getting close to the end. So I'm going to ask you guys to give everybody a bit of a call to action, right? So what would you like everyone in the audience to sort of think about? What would you like them to do? What would you like them to take away from this? So I'll start with Liam.
Well, I guess for me, and this is, I guess, why we formed Indigitek, is the opportunity to participate in, our gatherings and being able to connect. So we're, Indigenous focused community, but we have, a lot of people who are non-Indigenous to come in and actually hear about some of the amazing stories that, that we showcase, because we want to be able to share with people. Like, I'll give you an example. A guy that I grew up with, an Indigenous guy that I grew up with, he's been working, he works at Hitachi Data Systems, and he's a He's a technical delivery officer. Well, he was, and now he's a lead for across Asia Pacific. And he's an Indigenous man, and I always tell him, you need to share your story, because not only in our community is it important, but it's also important to actually share that across, the wider community, so that people can actually see, what is actually going. Because one of the things that I remember when I was at Microsoft was I had this comment, why they're more like you, and I'm like, there's plenty more like me. You just have to have a look, and that's what we want to do with Indigitek, is be able to encourage non-Indigenous people to come into this space as well, because for us it's about a values exchange as well. When we have people come into Indigitek to learn about all the different cultures that make up this country, learn about all the skills and knowledge that we have, and how we actually get to share that for the benefit of all the people who participate in Indigitek. So definitely, opening it up to the room, and Indigitek is TEK, not CH at the end. So opening it up to everyone to come along and participate and be a part of the community, because it's a bigger conversation that we're looking to have, and we're looking to provide talk about challenges and talk about solutions, and just share these opportunities, so that we can all, I guess, share in this journey and this opportunity. And this is about building the pie. How are we building the pie of opportunities and talent? Because one of the things that does happen is in Australia there's a huge demand for Indigenous employees at the moment, and in tech it's difficult to be able to find that talent. So, and this was a challenge that I had within my business, Ngakkan, Nyaagu, and GNY for short, is we wanted to hire Indigenous talent, and we had to challenge with the corporate Australia, because they got better packages and better, pay better dollars. So we then had to build the talent in-house ourselves to be able to then service that desire that we had. So, I guess the other call out is, if you're really looking to participate as well, please consider investing in the pipeline, and then not just at the gates of the universities or the tertiary education units where you can actually scoop up the talent. Yes, that's great, but what are we doing to build the pipeline up of talent, more so than just focusing on it being, market ready already. So those are the two things. So participate in Digitek Connect, please do, and and consider conversations around investing earlier and supporting earlier.
Corey, what would you like people to take away?
Pretty much what Liam said. It's pretty much any Indigenous business that you'll come across, we've all got the same values. We've got the same vision, no matter whether it's in tech, construction, what it may be. We've all been doing something community-based, social-based as well. I'd like to see, one of the main reasons we started Goana and my shareholders had come on board is because we had the same vision. We all have that passion for Indigenous people not missing out on that digital economy, the digital revolution, because the gap is getting wider. So I'd like to see that. The support in Indigenous sector not only creates more opportunities, but it creates a sustained flow as well. So I couldn't agree any more with Liam, to be honest, because we've all got the same vision. And the more we speak to Indigenous businesses, the more you'll hear it.
Great. Rob, I'll throw to you for the last couple of minutes.
Thank you. Three things for me. One is knowledge, education, awareness is mutually empowering. So, that connectivity. And second one is look beyond the immediate horizon in decision making. Really invest in what the medium and longer term outcomes could be. Third one is every dollar spent is in the local economy is more than $1 spent. Yeah. So I think that circular economy focus is really important as well, back to what Liam was saying earlier. So for me, there are kind of three key themes. You've got to be a bit bold and take sometimes, moderate risks to get some fantastic outcome.
Beautiful. So we've almost out of time. I'll throw quickly to the audience. If there's any burning questions that anybody has, would like to ask the panel. There we go.
Thanks, mate.
Hi, you guys talked about a couple of questions. Thanks for the panel, by the way. It was amazing. Such an important conversation to have. When you guys refer to as Indigenous business, what does it mean? Does it mean just the founder of the business is an Indigenous person? I would like you guys to explain that. And then secondly, where do we find talent? I run a software company. I understand from your community I can find some talent, but in general, where can you find Indigenous talent?
So I guess so. The first question. So that's a very interesting question as well, and it's kind of a point of sensitivity in terms of what is an Indigenous business. So effectively, from I guess a definition standpoint, Indigenous business is a business that is 50 or 51% owned by an Indigenous person. The capacity of that person within the business varies in terms of whether they're a subject matter expert or not. I guess when we kind of talk about it from a community perspective, an Indigenous business is one as well that actually benefits and serves our people too in terms of social impact and driving strong outputs and outcomes as well. So we, I guess from an NGNY perspective, so we're 100% Aboriginal-owned business, and we look to employ Indigenous people. We're not exclusive in terms of Indigenous people, but we love to be able to create that opportunity and that exposure. So, for example, two of the guys that worked in my team at NGNY, one now works in cybersecurity at CBA, and the other one works in robotics at CBA. But they started their journey with us. So that's what I guess is the definition of an Indigenous business. In terms of, I guess, looking and finding talent, so there is some talent out there in terms of at the university layer, and for some reason in Queensland, there's a lot of people doing software engineering and computer science who are Indigenous. So I don't know what they got in the water up there, but they're moving in that direction pretty quickly. But what we do is we actually we're engaged with a couple of private institutes who provide coding and programming opportunities. So like Coder Academy, we're in talks with RMIT Online at the moment, and with General Assembly as well, and we create that initial exposure and provide that support to them, and have learning pathway mentors and career pathway mentors as well, so that we can help people feel comfortable through that journey that they're going through to be able to then actually start moving into the corporate space. So
Cool.
Yes,
You go, Corey.
Yep. So for us, pretty much it's exactly the same about the Indigenous owned and operated business, how much control that business has, the social output as well, the social income. For us, trying to utilise our pathways for our client, not only our clients but through our partners as well. We'd like to, pretty much we go through like the likes of TAFE, the likes of universities, our clients, our partnerships as well. Just trying to get the word out there, and that keen exposure as well. It's utilising companies like Liam's as well, and there's many other companies that we'd like to speak with too. It's providing that bringing somebody in and upskilling as well. So it's utilising our partners to not only come through Goana's pathways, but it's having that broad look at IT, because it's not just coding. There's a huge range. We can go all the way up to project management. It's that mentoring as well through that pathway. Not every Indigenous kid wants to go to university, and that's just the fact. Not everyone. I didn't go to university. I found IT late, but I'm so glad I did, because I know where it's heading now, and I'm so passionate about what I'm doing and whatever opportunity we come across, because I can see an end result. Working with the Indigenous Chamber of Commerce, I think we should have a great conversation about that, because what we're doing is we're building that capacity. We've got this $1 billion wave of opportunity with all these incredible policies, but we haven't built the pipeline. So they've hit us with, we've given you this, we've given you that, but we haven't got the pipeline to take care of that. We'd love to see a time where it's just like, okay, let's get this moving, Okay, what's the scope? Okay, 8 years down the track, we can see where it's heading. Let's build that pipeline first before we get to that stage. So there's an ongoing with, there may be a position for 12 to 15 months. That's not enough time. We're looking for that ongoing, that maintenance, or that long-term relationship to then upskill and move our people forward. And I think that's one of the biggest things with Goana. We're all about the upskill and making sure we can keep pushing forward into that digital era.
Great. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the guys for participation in the panel. Thanks a lot, Liam, Corey. Thanks a lot, Rob. Thanks everybody for.